Hello, this is Chess Club Lesson 5 for Week 5 of a weekly after-school enrichment class, Chess Club, that you might be teaching at a school. Maybe the math teacher is teaching and knows how to play chess but does not have a lot of experience teaching. Well, there's a lot more to it than knowing the rules of the game and how to play somewhat. So, hopefully you have seen the first 4 weeks. The first weeks concern themselves with the chessboard itself, the geometry of the board, and a few facts about the chessboard, and to know how to identify squares using the coordinate notation, which uses a letter for the vertical columns called files, and a number for the horizontal rows, which we call ranks. Each square is at a unique intersection of a letter and a number, such as E4. We should be able, on an unmarked board, to quickly identify any square, whether from the black or white side of the board, or if someone points out a square, we should be able to say what square it is, or to find a square by name. You should get this completely down pat as much as you can. Now, younger kids have a hard time finding an interest in it because they don't really see the application. But you can play games kind of like the battleship game, and I'm sure that if you're creative, you can think of some ways to get students to take an interest in that. But believe me, it's a very important first step to learn the chessboard. Now, the pieces. You want to know the names of all of the pieces in at least one language and be able to pronounce them and spell them. We need to know how they move without ambiguity, without having to spend time trying to recall every single piece. The knight and the pawn give newcomers the most difficulty, even when those newcomers are adults. But they have been covered in the previous first 4 weeks. So after the first 4 weeks, this 5th week is a good time for the classroom teacher to go around and find any deficits in knowledge, because there's a difference between knowing how to play and knowing how to play better. So first we need to know all of the rules and just what we're allowed to do before we start to wonder about how to play better and how to win. So everybody needs to be perfectly crystal clear on the movements of the pieces, including enpassant and castling. It is not a good idea to save those for very much later on. They're part of the basic chess game, not even tournament chess. If you're playing a game with a relative at a picnic, still enpassant and castling are part of the game. Now, a chess game can be drawn. It can be equal, a tie. So you can win, you can lose, or you can draw. The game is lost when your opponent wins. You win by making a checkmate. A previous video went over check, checkmate, and stalemate. After check, the game may still be going unless it's a checkmate. If you checkmate your opponent, you win the game. If your opponent checkmates you, then they won, which means you lost. Stalemate is a type of a draw. One of 5 types of draws listed here that we've talked about already. A stalemate, you should remember, is when the player whose turn it is to move has no legal move. There's no move that they're allowed to make, but they also, at the same time, they're not in check. So stalemate is no check, no move, and it's a draw, a tie. There's also insufficient material. So if you have a king against a king, that's just a draw automatically and immediately. There's no reason to keep playing. If you have a king plus 1 minor piece only, against a king only, that would be a king and a knight against a king, or a king and a bishop against a king. That's just a draw. And the game should be immediately and automatically abandoned as drawn. A king and one minor piece against a king and one minor piece, you should just agree to a draw, but that's going to be a draw. Threefold repetition is where the exact same position of all black and white pieces is occurring for the third time with all of the same moves available as each of the previous two times. So if there was an enpassant or a castling possibility before, but the same position of pieces has occurred, but now the castling or the enpassant is not available anymore, well, then it's not considered to be the same position. But when the position of all pieces, black and white, appears for the third time with any number of other moves and positions in between, then a threefold repetition can be claimed. A draw by agreement is where both players agree, okay, this is going to be a draw, like you might in a cat game of tic-tac-toe. 50 move rule. If 50 consecutive moves by one player have passed without any check or capture, then the game can be declared drawn by the 50 move rule. Now, these B through E here, these other methods of getting a draw, are going to be talked about in greater detail later. But the important thing to remember now is that stalemate is only one kind of a draw. The word draw and the word stalemate are not interchangeable any more than German Shepherd and dog are interchangeable, because some draws are not stalemates and some dogs are not German Shepherds. The math concept is a proper subset. So we've talked about stalemate, but we're going to revisit insufficient material, threefold repetition, agreement, and 50 move rule later on. Now, when you have learned all of the rules of chess, then we'll begin to learn how to win or avoid losing. So strategy involves itself with plans that might be very specific or might be more general. In the opening, which is that part of the game where you're playing moves that you've somewhat memorized and where you are in positions that you may recognize you've been in before, we call that the opening, when you're just getting your pieces out, like the opening of a book at the beginning of a story. And the three main things we want to do, whether we're white pieces or black pieces, no matter what type of opening it is, we want to control the center, develop your pieces, and castle. Now, once both players have made several moves and neither player knows with any certainty what they would do, in other words, they're both in a position that's unique to them, where you start thinking and trying to figure out what you ought to try to do. This is the middle game, when the pieces are deployed and the players begin independent and original calculation and agendas. You should try to make all of your pieces important and active in that they are attacking and defending. You establish as threatening and flexible a position as you can. Endgame. Now, if I didn't know chess, I would think, well, doesn't every game have an endgame? But no. Although all games end, not all games have an endgame. So what I'm talking about here is an endgame is a position where one or both players should bring their king toward the center instead of hiding your king as we would when it's very dangerous and there are many dangerous pieces out there. In the end game, it might even just be king and pawns. Then it's actually beneficial to bring your king out. So an endgame is a position where it is useful and a positive thing to bring your king toward the center. And the primary strategy for at least one player involves promoting a pawn. That means getting a pawn to the other side and turning it into a queen or something. And your opponent may be trying to do the same thing while they try to stop you. You want to centralize your king, create passed pawns. We'll learn about pawn structure and what that means, passed pawn. But for now, a passed pawn is a pawn that encounters no resistance from enemy pawns on its way to being promoted. So create passed pawns and push them. It means keep moving them forward and have your king nearby those pawns to guard them. So we want to centralize your king, create passed pawns and push them, and have your king assist passed pawns and make all pieces useful. So these are very general ideas, and strategy is what we'll focus on after we're sure that everybody has the rules. So this being the 5th week of instruction, probably some kids in the class already know how to play, so they can be helpful in teaching those people who might be unclear on how the knight moves and how the pawn moves. You might be unclear about castling. You should be aware that you can castle on either side of the board, and you should be crystal clear on what is check, checkmate, and stalemate. And practice games would be appropriate at this point. So this is what we're trying to learn after 5 weeks. We want to make sure that we know what's coming in terms of what we're going to learn about strategy. But first things first, we have to know the basics, which start with the chessboard, learning the chess notation, learning the names of the pieces, how to pronounce them, how to spell them, what capital letter are used to represent them. For instance, N for knight and K for king. We have to know the basic rules, the piece movements, that the rook moves horizontally or vertically, the bishop moves diagonally only, the queen can move like a rook or a bishop, the king goes 1 square in any direction, the knight goes to the nearest opposite colored but non-adjacent square. The nearest square the other color that's not right next to the knight. So the knight is going to switch colors every time he moves. He's always going to move to a square that's 2 steps away and can never move like any other piece. The game can be won, lost, or drawn. The game is lost when your opponent wins. You know, they won first. The game is won if you checkmate your opponent, or if your opponent gives up, or if you're using a clock and they run out of time in a position where it is possible for you to checkmate them. A game could be drawn by stalemate, which means the player whose turn it is to move has no legal move and they're not in check either. And then we'll discuss these other methods of getting a draw later, but it's good enough to know that stalemate is not the only type of a draw, though it is a draw. And then when we start learning how to play better, we're going to focus on, in the beginning of the game, just getting both knights and both bishops off the back row, try to control the center, develop your pieces, and castle, make your king safe. Once you get into the game, then you should try to make all of your pieces useful. Find pieces that are not doing anything. Anticipate threats. Like if somebody can move their pawn up and threaten to capture your queen, you want to make sure that you have a place to move your queen, or maybe you can checkmate them. But at least think in advance. Endgame. If a whole bunch of pieces, most of the pieces get traded away, then it's actually useful to bring your king out and try to turn a pawn into a queen. So this should be a good point in time for reviewing the first 4 videos. Also, there are many videos on this channel describing in great detail those types of a draw. Students can watch these at home if they want to. You can pay attention to the URL up top, and do subscribe and like, and we will see you in the next video.